Hello there everyone. I'm making these videos in preparation for the meetings that we will have between Indian intellectuals and thinkers and Israeli intellectuals, thinkers, rabbis, etc. I think it would be very important to have some background material just so we would have some basic common ground. We should understand what the issues are. So I'll make a few videos here. Some will be a bit more down to earth. Some will be a bit more of a deep dive into deep foundational cultural issues, as I'm a firm believer that one cannot really understand a culture without knowing at least something about its classical culture, about the foundations of its culture. So here we are. Let's start. So the first question we're asking is, what does my culture contribute to the world today? In other words, that would be the Israeli culture or the Jewish culture. In other words, Jews would be Jews living in the diaspora also. As we know, the majority of Jews nowadays still live in the diaspora, even though the most committed Jews mostly live in Israel. And Indians, yes, and the Indian culture, Indian cultures, as we will see. Of course, there's more than one culture going throughout the entire Indian history till today, throughout all of India. Okay, so let's start with the basics, and then ask the questions. We have to understand, we will try to understand some of the foundational issues. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the similarities. Both Indian culture and Jewish culture have been the bedrock, have been foundational for numerous cultures. We know in America they talk of the Judeo-Christian tradition. In other words, the Judaism and Christianity have been welded together to make to form one of the foundations of Western society. In other words, they talk about the two H's, the Hebrews and the Hellenes. In other words, the Israelites and the Greeks as being the two foundations of Western culture. And we know in India also, there was, of course, the Vedic. Even if you don't want to go back to the Harappa and Indus Valley, but you can, of course, there's the Veda and the Upanishads and the classical tradition, in which many branches have branched off. Indian culture, Buddhist, Hindu culture, that would be, and Buddhist culture, and many cultures. Okay, even if we just point out in Judaism, it would be Judaism, Christianity, and of course Islam, which took different aspects of Judaism. And in India, it would be, at least for starters, we'll say Hindu culture and Buddhist culture. Of course, you can name other, you can talk about Indonesian society or different things like that, okay? The oldest culture is still following their ancient religion. In other words, if you were to, I think that's also very simple. The ancient, no one in Germany worships the ancient gods of German mythology. They are Christians. No one in Arabia worships Uzza, Ilat, and Al-Manat. They worship Islam. But the Jews and the Indians still worship their ancient religions, even though, of course, the religions have taken different twists throughout the generations. Both societies are traditional and family-oriented. Nowadays, as we know, the Western family is in a great crisis, and not only the Western family. You can talk about Korean family or Japanese family. Also, basically, the institution of family is in crisis. Low birth rates, and so the family is still very strong, both in India and in Israel. I come from a family of 5, and this might be I come from a religious family, but it's nothing unusual to have 5 kids in a religious family. And traditional. As I wrote here at the bottom of the slide, balancing between the ancient and the modern. Neither Indian society nor Israeli society, even though we are at different stages of modernization and development, but neither culture has opted for throwing out everything that was old and just adopting everything new, like Western Europe, for instance, has done. In Western Europe, there's very little left of tradition, whereas in India and in Israel, that is not the case. And, so the third thing I wrote here, from exile and servitude to independence via character building. In other words, the Jews, of course, had the exile, in which almost 99% of the Jewish people lived outside the land of Israel for, let's say, for argument's sake, it's debatable when it started, but let's say for argument's sake 2,000 years, even though it's a bit less. And of course, we had no kingdom of our own, we had no institutions. or even culture. We had, no Jewish architecture. It's been pointed out that there is no Jewish architecture. There is architecture of synagogues, but there is no tradition of how to do architecture in Israel because it was never done in Israel. Very few, in other words, the land was basically more or less empty at different stages. There were Jews here, there were Muslims here, all throughout the whole Middle Ages, continuously, but not very many, and there was no really continuous tradition. And India had something else. It had a different problem. In India, Indians were still living in their ancestral lands, but they did not have their own. They had reached servitude of the English, of different empire, the Dutch, the French, different colonial powers, or different invaders, etc. So they had a different problem. And the solution to both the one commonality is that both of our cultures, realized that it was not enough just to become independent, to hoist the flag and declare independence. You had to build the character. You had to change the basic character of the nation, because the character had become accustomed to servitude, to being a slave. You had a slave mentality, and therefore, in order to become independent, you had to change the character. You had to become. There was talk of muscular Judaism, a Jew who could be a soldier, who could be a farmer, etc. And in India also there were different things, different such motifs. As we know, character building is a big thing in the RSS, etc. And of course Gandhi had his own take on what character he was trying to build, etc. And like I wrote here, both countries are non-Western democracies. Now, India, it's very obvious that is a non-Western democracy. That doesn't have to be explained. In Israel, most people will view themselves as Western, but I personally dispute this. As I said, we are more traditional than than Western countries. We are not Christian. As Samuel Huntington pointed out, that civilizations are founded on religion. Samuel Huntington, in a footnote, said that there is no such thing as a Jewish civilization, because the Jews did not have all the trappings of a civilization, mainly because most Jews lived in exile. But nowadays, I believe that is not the case. I believe that, yes, we have a civilization here in Israel. We are not completely Western. We have part of the Middle Eastern trappings in our behavior. If it's music and food, and we're rather loud, and we don't have not completely Western manners, if I may say. So yes, I don't think that we are completely Western. We are not completely Eastern, as many people would say India is, but we are not completely Western. I think that is very clear, and I think that should be pointed out. Okay. On the other hand, we have many differences that are also completely obvious if one looks into it. Of course, Judaism is the foundation of monotheism, believing in one God in the West. Jewish religion also has orthodoxy and iconoclasm. In other words, orthodoxy means that there is one correct way of doing things, or in theory, one correct way of doing things. In other words, there is a right way to do Jewish law, and there is heterodoxy. There are groups that have deviated from Jewish law. But Jewish law, if we were to talk about the law, it's or even faith, there are different articles of faith, that it's very clear that you have to believe A, B, C, or do 1, 2, 3 to be loyal to Jewish heritage. And iconoclasm, the breaking of idols, this is a central theme in Jewish tradition, and we will discuss this in the meetings, what breaking of idols actually means nowadays. Jews do not blow up Buddhas at the Bamiyan. We have not been doing that for over 2,000 years. Even before 2,000 years, we stopped doing that. So it's an interesting question that we will discuss in the meetings. And I might actually upload it here afterwards. So what iconoclasm actually means nowadays? In other words, the breaking of idols, the breaking of different mental shackles, shall we say, different ideas that are chaining us. That is basically the view of an idol. It's a limitation. It's an unwarranted limitation. But anyhow, it's an interesting question. But this, again, Judaism was the source of iconoclasm. Even if Jews do not blow up Buddhas, and if the Taliban would have come asking us, we would have told them not to blow it up. But yes, many years ago, thousands of years ago, we did that. We invented that. Whereas, on the other hand, Indian culture believes in idols, as we all know. Pluralism, religious pluralism. Mahatma Gandhi, when he started reading the Bhagavad Gita, he did not go and ask what is the correct way to interpret it, and what does Guru A or Guru B, what does he say about this? He had his own interpretation that he thought worked for him. So there is religious pluralism in which everyone can, every culture has what is deemed acceptable and not acceptable. But yes, there is pluralism. There is much more pluralism. and incarnation of gods. This is even great. This is one of the greater differences between Judaism and Indian religion, or even Christianity. Christianity, according to Orthodox Jews, according to Jewish tradition, is considered idolatry because they believe that Jesus was a god. Jesus was a god. Whereas in Judaism, and of course in India, we know that men can be gods and gods can be men, and there are avatars, etc. But in Jewish tradition, even though we differentiate between, again, forget the exact terms, but between holiness and divinity. In other words, a man can be holy, and we say that he has holiness within him, but he is not a god. You can never worship a man, and worshipping a man, again, is viewed as a kind of idolatry and mental slavery, so to speak. You are worshipping a false god. Okay. The second thing I wrote here: Jewish redemption is national and political. Yes, that basically, if one reads the Torah, the beginning of the first 5 books of Moses, the beginning of the Bible, one immediately sees that the books of Moses are aimed at the nation. The nation of Israel is the basic unit that is being addressed, and it is political. The end game of the Jewish law, of the laws of Moses, is to found a kingdom, found a divine kingdom, a kingdom that has holy ways, a kingdom that is an exemplar of holiness. Whereas Indian enlightenment, again, I'm not using the exact terms. We all know the terms are different, moksha, etc. But Indian enlightenment is personal and internal. It's not about the country, the nation of India attaining moksha. It is about the individual attaining moksha, and it is internal. It's not about walking out into the street and there is a big somehow you see enlightenment in the street. No, it is about what happens inside the person. Whereas, again, this is in stark contrast to Judaism, where even though Judaism, of course, has mysticism and its own concepts of enlightenment and holy Ruach HaKodesh, what is called, what the Christians call Holy Ghost or prophecy, basically, the prophets are the basic paradigm of enlightenment in Judaism. Again, basically, the end game is national and political. Okay, Indians did not experience exile and retained many normal national aspects that Jews had lost. Arts, architecture, monarchy, military, farmers, etc. Again, as I explained, this is very simple. Indians, of course, Indian founders of Indian nationalism believed that India had to, again, build its character, but Indians, of course, still had many aspects that Jews had lost completely. They had their own indigenous arts and architecture and monarchs and military and farmers, etc., which Jews did not have, basically. We had to learn these talents anew. Okay, and Jews went through a very traumatic modernization. Again, if one knows about contemporary Israeli society or Jewish society, modernization has been very traumatic. Jews have gone from being extremely religious to, in many cases, being extremely anti-religious. Again, Israeli society is more traditional, but Jews in the diaspora, many of them espouse radical anti-religious ideas, progressive ideas. Communist Jews, again, communism. Many Jews were active in Russian communism. Again, this is an embarrassing thing to admit, but it is completely true. And yes, and there are modernization. So the ping pong of becoming very religious, very anti-religious, somewhere in the middle. These issues are not completely solved till today within Israeli society. If one is familiar with Israeli politics and the different grudges that different segments of society bear against each other, it has been a traumatic modernization has been a traumatic experience, and we are still sifting through it. We are still trying to, so to speak, completely normalize the issue of religion and tradition and modernity, even though, as I said, in Israel it's working far better than in the diaspora. And whereas in India, again, most Indians I talk to say that tradition is not the same as it used to be when the entire country was villagers and completely religious, completely unmodernized. And today there is, of course, much modernization in India, but again, there is still India is only modernizing now, and the traumas and scars, if there will be any, have not appeared. Let's put it this way: have not appeared in the same intensity that they have among the Jews. And it should be also pointed out that there has been little historical connection between our nations. That there was, again, one can point out prominent Jews and prominent Indian Jews, prominent different connections, but historically most Jews had never met an Indian, and most Indians had never met a Jew. And you can read, India is like a fantastic place, like a romantic place. You can read in the book like Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, his Kuzari, where he talks about the wise men of India. It's a completely fictional character. He uses it just as a literary technique. He had never met an Indian. Okay, so that should also be pointed out. Okay, so here we've reached the next session, and that I will discuss this in the next video. Okay, thank you, and you can go to the next video for the next subject. Bye bye.